Hello and welcome to yet another episode of your favorite D&D podcast, Mastering Dungeons. That's right. I have it on authority that at least one person out there, this is their favorite. So therefore I'm talking to you. Yes, you. We appreciate you.
Thank you.
And I appreciate my co-host Teos Abadia. Hey Teos, thanks for joining us yet again.
Well, it's a pleasure, Bob.
You keep coming back for more, and that's what we love about you. That's what I
Yeah, no,
appreciate about you, Teos.
it is the most fun I have all week. I for sure, and I had a fair amount of fun because you see this little guy. This is my inspiration.
Oh, nice.
The Neverwinter MMO has gone to Spelljammer, and I've been
Mhm.
jumping on a lot of Star Moth ships recently. Um, and it's pretty fun. It's neat to see D&D in space in 3D. Kind of fun.
As opposed to 4D, which would be a little harder to make a mini for. Um, but speaking of the fourth dimension, we get emails and things from our listeners, some of whom are in the fourth dimension. Uh, Not this week, but some week
Maybe.
we'll get a message from our fourth dimensional listeners. But one of our third dimensional listeners, a synthetic 20, via YouTube, gave us a comment and a question. And I'm splitting these two up so we can take each one in its proper turn. So, Synthetic 20 first says, regarding your last episode, the inhospitable nature of the gate towns can push players out into other parts of the Outlands, which are incredibly dangerous. The inhospitable nature helps make travel into other areas an easier decision. Why would you stay in the safety of a place when it does not want you there? At least that's been my experience running game in this setting. It kind of turns adventure into a more reasonable profession. Uh, and so I'm using Synthetic 20's question or comment here, but we got a lot of great feedback from our listeners about, oh, this is how you use the Outland. If you use the Outland this way, it makes perfect sense. Or if you do this, it makes perfect sense. And I love how game smart and how story smart our listeners are, because we get great feedback like this. However, nowhere in the book with the words on the page that we actually read does it say this is how you do adventures in the Outland. And that's what we're talking about when we say not only does this setting content need to tell you what it is, it needs to tell you how to use it. So, we love these ideas. We might even have these ideas on our own. It sounds like a lot of people who commented on this, like, played the original Planescape
Right.
or have
Right.
played versions along the way, and they're like, "Oh, this is what they mean." That's great, unless you haven't bought or read the previous stuff,
Yeah.
which I would guess a lot of people who are buying it are in that category, such as me.
Yeah. I mean, so I have a couple thoughts about this, and I think everything you're saying is spot on. The setting should start with telling you what the point of things is, and
Mhm.
it should drive towards that. So whatever, because this is a construct, right? Like we started with a blank page, and you wrote up a thing. So what's the point of that thing? And it should line up to create then a play experience. It shouldn't be that it sounds like one thing, but the play experience is another if you do this, one shiny trick, or if you run at a certain angle. It should work kind of as established because we created it. Otherwise, go back to the blank page and create something else, right?
Yeah.
You can still work to speak to nostalgia, but make it some other experience. And in 5e, they leaned into making it especially kind of hard and hard to change things, hard on the players as an experience. Um, Everything feels like that Star Trek episode where you're going to very quickly go, "Oh wait, things aren't great here."
Mhm.
And why? What is the play experience we're looking for there? Is it to shove you into the planes beyond, go into the gate, get out of here? Is it to go back into the Outlands? But the Outlands aren't really well defined, so why don't you define it if that's where my play is? I agree with you. It's all a little misaligned. See what I did there?
I see what you did there. when Joe Rosso and I did our talk at GameHole Con, we talked about creating worlds for different vehicles. So you might world build for a card game. You might world build for a movie. You might world build for a work of fiction or a role-playing game or a tabletop board game. And what you do with when you're building it may differ depending on that medium that you plan to use. And I feel like in these things we see, we're getting partway there to what your setting needs to be for a role-playing game that you as the game master are going to build a story, an encounter, an adventure based on. But we don't get that the full way. This would be great if somebody was writing a work of fiction. There's themes, there's encounters they could use, but this isn't that. This needs to be a tool that a game master is going to use to help create a story with their players. We got a comment along these lines from Man and Martin just this morning, said that the possibility of a gate town being drawn into the outer plane is a great story hook. You can just imagine having the factions, one faction fighting to get the town to that, another faction fighting to stop that from happening. And again, this is great. I could see running a campaign based on that or an adventure based on that. But we never are told by this setting guide that players or game masters or creatures in the world know that this can happen.
Right.
If we're said, if it's said, player, people know, who knows? Does everyone know? Or is it just certain powerful creatures know? We need that information, or we at least need to hear, if you decide to make it part of your world where creatures know this can happen, this happens. Yeah. But unless we know, we can't do anything with it.
Yeah, and it even goes back to, I think, the first time we were talking about Planescape, which the question was raised of, what's the point of having gates in all of these different places? Mm-hmm. And this came up, I think, on our Discord, where I was talking about, really when I think about how I write an adventure as a DM, right, just my own home campaign, I generally am thinking like, you are in the ancient evil temple, and the thing in the temple opens a portal to the 9 hells, and you're going to go through. I don't narratively think you need to get to the 9 hells, so now you're going to go to Sigil, and then in Sigil find a portal, and from that portal find your way to a gate town, and from the gate town go to the 9 hells. Like, that is so disconnected from my plot. Yeah. But there are so many, and it's fine to have raw materials, right? And this gives you a lot of raw materials, but it's a little like, is this really how we play? It's almost like the point of Sigil is you're not sure what to do with your campaign, so go to Sigil and then have some weird adventures, and then from there maybe have some weird adventures in a gate town, and then maybe go to the plains or not.
Yeah. Yep. And that leads into Synthetic 20's question. To turn this into a listener question, do you often run planar adventures? What planes do you think make the best or worst adventures, and why? If you were designing your own set of planes, how would you approach that design?
Recording again. Good.
Me too.
Recording in progress.
Cool.
So to answer Synthetic 20's question, I've got 2 things to talk about. I'm going to do the first, and then I'm going to let Teos go, and then I'll come back to my second. Right. So I want the planes to be areas that change the very nature of the reality that the characters have come to expect. So I want the planes, to challenge the characters in ways that they can't be challenged on their home planes. I want to set the characters in a world and say, now you know the realities of this world. You get used to that, and then we're going to turn it on its head by sending you to Arcadia, to the 9 hells, to the Abyss, to the Beastlands, wherever I want to tell a specific kind of story. That's what I want when I run planar adventures.
Yeah, similarly. I mean, honestly, the thing that often resonates for me the most is when I've either played in or run adventures involving like the Feywild or the Shadowfell. Because of those factors you're talking about, it changes the expectations of everything. and it means that the world is not what you expect. So there's engagement and interest, right? It's like the whole plane becomes a mystery. You want to resolve what can I do here, right? Things like with the Fae, where it's like that if they give you a gift, you must gift one back, right? Learning those kinds of things, or that someone might be able to say a thing and it means this particular thing versus this other thing that it would elsewhere. Those kinds of expectations are really interesting, and you can draw from really neat influences like fairy tales or other things like that resonate with the players in a kind of fun way. When I do outer planar things, I often have a big dramatic plot in mind. Something like the Rod of Seven Parts is being assembled, and you're trying to back home stop this, attack of all of these devils who are coming in to destroy Valuna, and you must once again get the 7 parts, and some of them are in outer planes, and so you're going through and chasing them. And that could involve a thing like going to Sigil to get information, but it's all very plot, right? It's along the lines of the plot. It's what I haven't really ever done is just hang around in Sigil doing, guard duty and cranium rats in the basement and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't used it as a setting in that way. And it is not particularly appealing to me because it flips exactly what you're talking about. It says, here are these amazing things. Oh, by the way, they're mundane. And I don't generally want that in my game.
Yeah. When the last adventure I remember writing that was truly planar in nature was a 4th edition adventure called Flames Last Flicker. Mm-hmm. And it was the 4th installment of the Flame tetralogy. Flame was the dragon that was in the very first Dungeon magazine adventure. And so I got to write the 4th one for 4th edition on the anniversary of that first adventure and Dungeon magazine launch. And so what I did was Flame became a Draco Demi-Lich. So not a Draco Lich, not a Demi-Lich, but a Draco Demi-Lich that was serving Tiamat. And what Flame was tasked to do by Tiamat was to drain the souls that were heading toward the plane that they were supposed to be going to and divert them to this other plane. Mm-hmm. So the characters at very high levels got to go out into the planes, into the astral to deal with that, but then go to these other planes and do very specific things for very specific reasons, not only having to deal with the threats there, but having to deal with the planes themselves and the environmental threats they bring and that sort of thing. Yeah. So that's what I want when I run adventures. And the last part of the question was, if you were making your own planes, what would you do? And it would be exactly that. I would build them with the idea first of, I need to challenge the characters. Not in mythology, there's Hades, and I want to make this plane as much as possible like the Hades there. That could be a touchstone. That could be a prompt. But in the end, it's the game that I want and the stories that could evolve from that game, as opposed to trying to keep it consistent with some mythological imperative from 2,000 years ago.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Well, Teos isn't going to argue with me on this one. So with that in mind, we get to move on to our news and commentary section. Thank you, Synthetic 20, and everyone who chimed in on our Outlands discussion. But for our news this week, we're going to start with a free inspiration deck handout. Teos, could you tell us a little more about this?
I would be glad to. So D&D Beyond has a image that you can download that serves as a free handout for the Book of Many Things, and it's called the Inspiration Deck. And this is an alternate approach to inspiration, and this is clearly kind of a marketing angle to say, hey, look, did you know that this book has all of these optional rules to make your game interesting, different, maybe better? So in this approach for inspiration, you will draw a number of cards equal to the number of players and place those Deck of Many Things cards face up on the table. When a player gains inspiration, they select one of those face-up cards and keep it for later use, each card has its own unique effect, which you find in this handout and in the table. When a player uses the inspiration, they get to draw a new card face up from that communal hand and shuffle the used card back into the deck. So you kind of constantly have this menu that you can choose from. And one thing that's nice is you have this visual reminder, hey, get some inspiration because you get to get one of these cards. And I think the players would know what that benefit is, but it creates this visual aspect of it. Another option is that when a player uses an inspiration card, the DM draws the top card from the deck and can use it at a later time to apply to NPCs or monsters. So you can download this image that shows the 22 cards from the link in our show notes, or look at D&D Beyond, and should be one of the recent news items.
Yeah, I think this is really cool. I think it is obviously marketing focused. In terms of, if you break it down in terms of game design, it's not perfect.
No.
Because you put the cards down, but the cards are only the cards. So you have to keep passing the sheet around to say, all right, it's the 2 of hearts, right? Okay, what does that mean? We've got 6 players, so there's 6 cards out. You have to keep track of what all 6 cards mean. And then, oh, I've got inspiration. All right, which card should I take? Let me see the sheet again. We did something for Aurora called the advantage system. And it's very, very similar to this, where if you get advantage on a check, you can forego advantage to draw a card randomly from this deck. And it has some of the similar things that are listed on this sheet. And then you can at some point choose to play what's on this card or do it on behalf of a player. And then we have different systems for, letting the DM do things. And so it's when I read this, I was like, oh, that's funny. That's sort of similar to what Scott and I worked on for that. But yeah, I'm not saying they obviously stole anything. Yeah, it's just it's a cool idea. It's too bad you couldn't actually print the cards to say what's on them on the card to make it a little easier. But
yeah, my favorite,
if it helps people. Yeah,
I love convergent evolution like that. Like one of my favorites was in the Ac Inc. Adventure that was created for the movie event long ago, the movie theater event in Cloud Giant's Bargain. There is a talking skull that serves as your sort of tutor and advisor as you go through the adventure. And at some point, someone says, "Oh yeah, like Morty," and I'm like, "Oh, the talking skull in the Planescape video game." I'm like, "Oh yeah, I never played that." Like, okay, well, there are items like it in Planescape. I'm like,
yeah.
If you say so. Like, I was sure you were just using that. I'm like, no, I don't think so. Like,
no.
And I did read some Planescape stuff back in the day, but I couldn't afford it back then, so I didn't buy a lot of it. And so yeah, it's funny.
Yeah. So that inspiration deck handout is available to you on D&D Beyond. Link in the show notes. We're getting a preview of the new D&D virtual tabletop at PAX Unplugged. Baldman Games, who are running the D&D events at PAX, will be doing this and including previews of the virtual tabletop as they run their games. Thoughts on this, Teos?
That's pretty neat. They are looking, I think, still for DMs. So you can, if you are software savvy and are interested and will be there in Philly, you could follow the link in the show notes or go to baldmangames.com/PAXU. But I'm very curious to see, is this going to be, so far, like every version anyone talks about is the same one we saw in April, and which was in the videos that people saw in like early April or late March. So I'm very curious, at some point, do we see like another real version, right? Something that's different and changes it up. And that would be, I think, very interesting for everybody. But in the meantime, we've got a different VTT from D&D, Shawn.
Yeah, we've got the maps. The maps VTT has now added maps for Castle Ravenloft, Candlekeep Mysteries, Rime of the Frost Maiden, Tal'Dorei, and Wild Beyond the Witchlight. A sale is in place to promote these additions, and if you have a certain level of membership in D&D Beyond, you already have access to maps. It's on my list of things to do. I have to check this out. I have way too much going on freelancing to do this, but I am going to check it out. And yeah, it's interesting to see how maps evolves compared to the virtual tabletop. And if they converge at some point, if they continue a separate design and development track, it's interesting.
It super is. It really is. And I love that this is one of these things where you hear like someone will go, "Oh, great. I am totally going to use this." And then someone else going, "This is the worst idea ever. I hate everything about it. Wizards is the worst company." Right. All the opinions on things like maps. And it always kind of cracks me up. I'm nowhere in the extremes. I'm I'm very much in the middle, and I'm glad there are more options. I'm always good for more options.
Yep. If you listen to our show, you've already heard one panel from GameHole Con. You heard Teos and I doing Mastering Dungeons Live. But did you know that Teos was on other panels? Yes, it's true. And 2 of the panels that Teos was on are now available online. Tell us about these, Teos.
Yeah, these were really fun panels, and I think are quite informative. Like sometimes I'm on a panel and I'm like, yeah, we did okay. I thought both of these were really useful with a lot of good audience questions and a very diverse panel with lots of different takes on these subjects. So one is breaking into TTRPG design. I shared some of the things that I've dealt with on the show, Success in RPGs, but there were all kinds of there's Matt. Why can I think of his last name? Marvel role playing game.
Forbeck.
Thank you. Talking about what it's like to be a full-time RPG designer with quadruplets. I think he had. Mm-hmm. And I'm trying to run the numbers. Go, is it even possible? I guess it must be. And so just so many different perspectives. Then we had another panel is narrative design in tabletop games, talking about how this has become such an increasing angle. And I think Free League was a big sponsor, and they had one of the main designers from Free League games there, and he was only too happy to be on this panel because we kept talking about Free League games and how well they combine mechanics and narrative as sort of examples, as well as many other types of games.
Mm-hmm. And so both of those are at podcast.darker-days.org, and the links there are also in our show notes.
Yeah, and I just want to say that you mentioned earlier your panel for Ghostfire games, and you didn't record that, did you?
I tried, but my computer ran out of juice halfway through.
Because it was a really good panel, and I did at least talk about it on my blog, alphastream.org. I kind of tried to summarize my experiences at GameHole and what were things I learned from it. And I definitely took away some good lessons from that panel. It was a great. You and Joe Rasso had some really neat stuff. That whole idea of top-down, bottom-up setting world creation was really fantastic. And so I did talk about that on my blog for folks who are interested.
Awesome. The blog Mindstorm Press has put up a nice article proposing a simple reputation system where PCs can gain reputation for their deeds and then have that reputation carry forward and gamify that in later encounters or story. Teos, do you want to give us a summary of this system?
Sure. In the blog, the idea is that the players will do something that the DM thinks, there could be people hearing about that. So you track this event as a sort of one-line summary, like, number 1, defeated the dragon by cunning, recovered the sword of pain from its hoard. Whenever the PCs meet someone after that who may have heard of something from their reputation list, the players roll dice, 1 for each of the events that are on the reputation. So if you have done 3 things so far, they would roll 3 dice. And the size of the dice can vary by campaign. So you can have D6 for low heroic campaigns, D20 where you're doing lots of amazing things. The DM rolls 1 die of the same size. And if the die is less than or equal to the number of exploits, the group is recognized. If the die matches the value of any of the dice the players rolled, so it's going to happen more over time, then the story ends up being bent, exaggerated, or otherwise changed. And I think that's a fun way, a simple, fun system for tracking how people react to the deeds your party has done. And I love that idea of it being exaggerated, changed somewhat, eventually quite often. And that's great.
Yeah, I like the simplicity. That's the noun I'm looking for. I love the simplicity of this system. As the game master, you can always just say, well, I'm deciding that the town has heard this because it's going to be good for the story.
Yeah.
Or I've decided they're not because of what I have planned. It wouldn't make sense. But if you're in that in between and you just want the dice to prompt you to do something different, a system like this is really cool. I don't know if I would use the system as it is, especially that chart at the end.
Yeah, sure.
That seemed to go, it gave some possible ideas, but some of them wouldn't always make sense for the specific thing that you might gain a reputation for. So it's not like the perfect system where it's going to fit all your reputation system needs, but it's a good starting point from which you could iterate. You could either simplify it even more, or you could start adding like negative reputation and start messing around with it there as well, with just a little bit of tweaking.
Yeah, that's what I like about it. It's like a nice basic idea that doesn't try to go too far beyond that initial idea. And from that idea, you can probably do something fun in your own campaign.
Now a little bit of creator and crowdfunding news. Next week, a week from this week, Ghostfire Gaming and its partnership with Eldermancy are going to be launching a Kickstarter called The Seeker's Guide to Enchanting Emporiums. This is the long-awaited sequel to The Seeker's Guide to Twisted Taverns, which was phenomenally funded.
Yeah.
That sort of started before I joined Ghostfire. And it was one of those things where I looked at it and I'm like, just taverns, huh?
Yeah. Yeah.
And almost $2 million, and it was just taverns? Okay. And then I saw the book recently, and I was like, oh, this is really good.
Yeah.
This is like
Lots
really good. And so now we're doing another one. Instead of taverns, we're doing emporiums, places that sell items, specifically magic items. So this is going to be filled with magic shops and mystical loot and unique NPCs and thrilling plot hooks and some mini adventures and lots of magic items. So you can sign up now at Kickstarter.com if you look for The Seeker's Guide to Enchanting Emporiums to be notified when the Kickstarter actually launches.
Very cool. Well,
And
I've got something for you,
okay,
Shawn, that's absolutely free.
Yeah?
Yeah, it's this came through our Discord, Patreon Discord. Folks were pointing out this Google Doc that has short summaries of all the locations they could find in second edition Sigil. And some of these are locations that you don't find in the 5e when we reviewed the wards. They're not in those chapters. So it's just a Google Doc, link in our show notes. No easy way for me to share it otherwise than that. But if you're listening to this and you're not on our Patreon Discord that receives the show notes, just speak up whenever folks need a link. We're glad to paste it into YouTube on request. But yeah, it's neat. And it's simple, just tells you about what these different locations are, but it's a nice way to dress up the wards.
Yeah, it would be interesting to see the ones that they did repeat, how they may have changed or not. Yeah. That's an interesting little bit of information and useful resource. And speaking of Planescape, very, very, very recently, the D&D Adventurers League released their newest Dungeon Craft document. If you don't know, Dungeon Craft is the ability for you, yes, you, to create your own Adventurers League content, legal Adventurers League content, and put it up on the DM's Guild. So this document tells you how you can do Planescape as a setting. Teos, what else did this discuss?
Yeah, you can get really nice coverage of this. Robert Aducci, who follows all things organized play in depth, he has a nice article on Ian World about it. Link in our show notes, or head to ianworld.org. The full information is on the AI updates channel, so you have to be on the D&D Discord and be subscribed to it, and then the link in our show notes will take you directly to it. And you can follow that channel in the Discord of your choice if you'd like to. It's basically the rules for what you can do to use Planescape as a setting. And it includes the usual information, right? Where it's saying like, hey, treat things well. Don't just like we have asked you in the past not to blow up Elminster. Please don't blow up the planes. Honor the setting and so on. But otherwise, you can do that for DM's Guild projects and create AL legal play experiences. I will note that these adventures have typically not sold well. I think that's a problem on the DM's Guild, getting enough sales to sort of validate your time as a sort of like creator. But it's an amazing way to get feedback from the community, to learn things, and to have something out there that you can point to and say, hey, I made that. I'd like to take on a project for someone else as a freelancer in some other capacity, or for the AL, one of the large campaigns that they do.
Yep. So all that is there. So that is our news. Thank you for listening.